Time management for mortals. We're talking about distraction today. Distraction, distraction, distraction. And this is chapter 5 of Time Management for Mortals, the watermelon problem. So we're just waiting for my live to get set up here. And here we go. Hi, friends. Here we are with our book study. 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. We are talking about the watermelon problem. We're talking about the problem of distraction and a problem of digital distraction, which feels unavoidable and inescapable. In this day and age, it feels that this, I think Berkman has some really, really apt critiques here. Let's see if, can you guys see my comment here? There we go. Okay, I'm gonna pin that. Then we're gonna get started here. Welcome, y'all. Here we are. 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. We are reading chapter 5, The Watermelon Problem. And we're talking about distraction. This is the theme that's really important to any of us because we want to pay attention to the things that we want to pay attention to. And at the same time, we can feel like we can get into a fight with our own humanity to try, thank you so much, Manshura, to try to focus on the things that we want to focus on. Indeed, we are constantly, our minds, it doesn't take long to realize how limited our capacity to control our minds are. In fact, I think much of our difficulties and challenges in life come because we have a false sense of a belief that we should be able to control our minds. And something that can be really helpful, especially for people who struggle with something like intrusive thoughts, is just the realization that anybody on this earth, at any time, in any place, can have any thought. So those thoughts that we have, we don't really have control over them. And this can be really helpful when we find ourselves afraid of thoughts. And so the watermelon problem, we're really looking at digital distraction. And he has a few lines here that just feel so poignant. He says that we look at, where are we at? Attention, on the other hand, is your life. Your experience of being alive consists of nothing other than the sum of everything to which you pay attention. And what I want to propose here, and kind of what I've been talking about throughout the week as I'm preparing to lead my group, Practicing Presence, which I would invite you to join if you're interested. Come at PP26 and I'll send you the info, is that our relationship with time has become wounded. Because when we've become hurt, we've cut off from that hurt and we've pushed that consciousness of pain away. Because what we can't process in the moment just gets distributed. And when it gets distributed, it doesn't get resolved. So there are young parts of us that are frozen in time. This is one of the reasons why we can be overwhelmed with tears and be like, I don't know where that came from. Or moments of fear where we just feel so small. It's often because we are actually stuck. That part of us is stuck and something's triggered that part to take over. And so our relationship with time gets disrupted because in order to protect ourselves, we cut off from consciousness. But that young part of us is still frozen there. And so what makes it difficult to be present is that we're afraid of connection because connection is the bridge over which pain and hurt came. And so when presence emerges, we flee for two reasons. One of them is that we're afraid of those old memories, those old hurts resurfacing, and we still think we're like the young child, the young individual that was hurt when they first happened. And so distraction isn't just a focus problem. Presence isn't just a willpower issue. Our difficulty to be present isn't a personal flaw, it's a symptom of unresolved hurt. We're relational creatures. So when we're hurt, we're created in relationship, we're hurt in relationship, but we're also healed in relationship. Relationship to ourselves, which gets disrupted when we're hurt, relationship to other people, which gets disrupted when we get hurt, and relationship to time itself. And so as we've been working through and talking about time management for mortals, that's what we're reading here today, the Watermelon Problem, chapter 5. What I want you to think about and consider is what your fears of being present are. When you sit down to be here, we can so often be trapped in this cycle of we are exhausted and burnt out, and at the same time, we don't know how to rest. Because there's all these parts of us that are managing our experience. We show up in relationships. We're afraid to be close. We're afraid to be far away because we have unresolved hurt. And so we can both resolve and restore our relationship with time by healing that relationship with time, by healing our own stories, and also through relational experiences with other people in the present moment. Because all of our relational coping skills are about the times that we've been hurt. They're about avoidance. And even fear itself. Fear is pain that we've experienced projected in the future. There's a saying that our greatest nightmares are almost always traumas that we've experienced in the past. As Donald Winnicott says, psychotherapist, that the catastrophes we fear are things that have already happened. So when we feel like, I don't know, I'm just afraid, we can actually ask, like, well, what does this feeling feel like? Right? It's this disrupted relationship with time where we're caught up in trying to avoid feeling that way, which is stopping us from being in the here and now. So one of the things he says here on page 91, right? What you pay attention to will define for you what reality is. And the issue that he points out so poignantly is that so much of our attention is ruled and determined by what you're on right now. Right? And I would love to welcome you into an experiment if you're just dipping in right now. Just notice what it's like to be here. You're scanning, you're evaluating. Is this something that I should stay in? Is this something that I should leave? Is this something that's worth my while? Notice the thoughts. Notice the flood of thoughts that are coming through your mind. Feel free to pop them into the comments. These thoughts that are just rushing through. One of the things he says is that our phones become tools to get us to want things we don't want. And so the answer can't just be an ironclad willpower, because we don't have an ironclad willpower, right? That's the whole point here. We're limited. But one of the other things that he says is that we wouldn't even really want our attention to be completely fixed. Because if we had this ironclad willpower, we would never be able to be surprised by a sunset, taken back by the beauty of someone that we love. We'd never be able to just say, like, wow, I can smell the flowers, I can hear the birds. And so this idea that what we want is this attention that's indistractable, it actually does not make space for the spontaneity with which life is. And that's why I don't think we want this unbroken attention. But what we want and what we desire is to find freedom in the present moment. We want to have the allowance in our system to simply be here. And so this is one of the areas where I think there's really two sides of this attention work. One of them is in something like mindfulness meditation, right, which I'm a huge advocate for. I have a very deep practice. And the other is in the relational work. Because the things that pull us out of the present moment, distraction is not a lack of concentration. Distraction is a response to anxiety, right? I don't think that ADHD, for example, right? I don't think ADHD is increasing in prevalence. I don't think more people are getting ADHD. I think the symptoms of ADHD are increasing. And I think that's occurring because we are experiencing nonstop these micro dissociations, these moments of like, oh, just pulling away, because we're constantly being pumped with more information. And that's what he says here in page 94, a machine for misusing your life. It's essentially a giant machine for pursuing you to make the wrong choices about what to do with your attention and therefore your finite life, by getting you to care about things that you didn't really care about. And you have far too little control over your attention to simply decide that you're not going to succeed to the temptations here on social media, the temptations of your phone. And one of the things he says here is that, we're all pretty aware that in terms of social media, in terms of technology, that we are the product that's being consumed. That the technology companies profit from seizing our attention and then selling it to advertisers, so that the data can be collected and used to show you exactly the content that's most likely to keep you horrified or angry. And he says, the strange thing here is that it's really not fitting to think about us as the products being sold. Roger McNamee says, after all, companies are generally motivated to treat even their products with a modicum of respect, which is much more than can be said about how most of these industries treat their users. A better analogy, McNamee says, is that we are the fuel. We are the logs that are thrown on Silicon Valley's fire. Impersonal repositories of attention to be exploited without mercy until we are all used up. So I want to invite you to sit with that again. We are not just the product. We're the fuels. The logs that are thrown on Silicon Valley's fire. Impersonal repositories of attention to be exploited without mercy until we're all used up. And there's this whole framework in the Matrix where the basic idea is that humans are being harvested for their organic matter to fuel the machines. But the reality right now is that what's being harvested is our attention. We're being shown things and progressively brought to like things that we don't even want, that we don't even need. And he said, it's not even a matter of just spending a little bit of time on social media. That's not actually the issue. Because the attention economy is designed to prioritize whatever's most compelling instead of whatever's most true or most useful. And so it systematically distorts your image of the world. It influences our sense of what matters, what kind of threats we face, how venial our political opponents are, and thousands of other things. And all these distortions and judgments influence how we use our offline time. If social media convinces you, for example, that the violent crime is far bigger in your city than it really is, you might find yourself walking the streets with an unwarranted sense of fear, staying home instead of venturing out, avoiding interactions with strangers, and then voting for a demagogue who's tough on crime. If all you ever see of your ideological opponents online is their very worst behavior, you're liable to assume that even family members who differ from you politically must be similarly irredeemably bad, making relationships with them hard to maintain. So it's not simply that our devices distract us from more important matters. It's that they change how we're defining important matters. Our devices sabotage our capacity to want what we want. And this is one of the things that's been so interesting for me, in this process and this experience of growing on social media in the last year as I've gotten started, is that I never in my life really wanted to have a viral video or wanted to have a lot of followers. I never really cared about those things. And then what was so interesting is I started social media, and then all of a sudden I wanted to do that. I wanted to grow. I wanted to have a viral video. I wanted that spike. And so it's just this perfect example of, man, now I'm beginning to want something that I never even wanted. And what does that do? I love this line here. He talks about, his relationship to Twitter and how in a kind of influencer culture, in a sharing culture, it can so easily invade us to talk about kind of everything. He says, or I would think about how my newborn son would do something adorable, and I'd catch myself speculating on how I might describe it in a tweet. As if what mattered wasn't the experience, but my unpaid role as a provider for Twitter. The difficulty is that we are losing connection with the things that we love in life because they're not designed to hold on to our attention. And what makes it even more difficult is that the only faculty that we can use to notice what's happening in our attention is our attention itself. In the words of T.S. Eliot, we're distracted from distraction by distraction. And so it's not just that more of our time is being taken up in social media and technology. It's that technology is changing and shifting the ways that we actually want to use our time. It's shaping the way that we think about people. It's shaping the way that we think about safety. And so we are fleeing because we're afraid to be in the present moment. And then what we're finding in these forms of distraction is just more fear. And one of the difficult parts of this is that it's not just that, Silicon Valley is out to get us. We want the distraction. We fly to it. Like, we're active participants in our own demise. And so one of the things that this chapter has really, really done is it's really helped me to reevaluate and explore my relationship to social media. And he says, as the technological critic Tristan Harris likes to say, each time you open a social media app, there are 1,000 people on the other side of the screen paid to keep you here. And so it's unrealistic to expect users to resist the assault on their time and attention by means of willpower alone. And so there is an assault. And also, we give in to the distraction willingly. Something in us wants to be distracted, whether by our digital devices or anything else. Something in us wants to not spend our lives on what we thought we cared about most. And so, again, I think one of the biggest things that we can ask ourselves is, what are we afraid of? What's drawing us to escape the present moment? What experiences in the past are we afraid to sit with? What does distraction help us to escape? What parts of my story do I believe that I can't handle? And here I think the IFS framework ties in very, very nicely, which is that when we're hurt, the vulnerable part of us that feels that hurt as a young child gets cut off from consciousness and pushed away to try to protect us from that feeling of vulnerability. And then another part of us at that age has to take on this job of trying to manage that experience to avoid, maybe by people pleasing, maybe by trying to control our emotions, maybe by just not allowing ourselves to have needs. And these develop over and over and over again. And then when those exiled feelings, those parts of us that we've pushed out of consciousness that are very young, get triggered and take over, sadness, hurt, anger, all of a sudden the firefighters rush in. The dissociators, the bingers, the drinking, the avoidance, right? To try to whip us away. And it begins the cycle again. But one of the things that we need to develop here is self-leadership. The recognition that I'm not that little child anymore. I'm not in 8th grade anymore. I don't need to protect myself from ridicule like I did then, because I can actually meet myself not from one of these parts, but from my adult self. And so I want to really invite you all to ask yourself this question. What's the hardest part of being in the moment for me? And not about willpower, not about like, well, I can't do it, but like when you show up and you say, hey, there's nothing to do here, what shows up? What parts do you show up? Maybe it's a problem solver. Maybe it's a part that feels anxious. Maybe it's in your body. Maybe it's anxiety. And I would really welcome you guys now to ask that and think about that. When you find yourself in stillness, what emerges? Here, I'd love to welcome any reflections that y'all have had on this chapter, on this conversation. Here, I've got a couple comments here. That can't be it. I like to look at it like some instinct to help to make people reconnect with themselves, to make them see what you see, make them change their focus, and hopefully this wakes up ourselves. I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at there, what you're disagreeing with, but I think that's been one thing that I think has been really, really helpful for me, is realizing that social media isn't designed to connect us with other humans. Social media is designed, at least the large platforms of social media, they're designed to entertain us. They're designed to keep us connected to the app, not to each other. And that was a really interesting realization for me, as because I kept feeling like, oh man, I really want to connect with people, but it kind of goes off in this way. And I realized like, oh, it's kind of like pushing a shopping cart and it's just pulling off to the side. I realized like, oh, that's like part of the design here. That's just like part of the way that it is. So I'd love to hear whatever thoughts and reflections you have, either while reading this book, or what are the great challenges of distraction that you find. I find that a lot of times, especially when there's, a task that I need to do, one of the big things that comes up in distraction is my own fear, the fear that I'm not good enough. We kind of talked about in the last chapter with procrastination. But I would love to hear what the challenges you have with distraction are. What fears you notice. What's the greatest fear about being in the present moment? When you're just simply here, what shows up? And then I want to welcome you all to, Practicing Presence is a group that I've created. We're starting on March 9th. And it's a group that I created because I've found so much deep healing in mindfulness, but I've also found it actually in relationship. And so one of the things that happens is that we struggle to be present because we flee from the moment because we were hurt there. And so we try to escape that. We try to run from it. But that when we're in the moment, those habits, those patterns come up, and that's what this group is about, is actually exploring those things that pull us out. Our fears are what stop us from being in the moment. So Mansara-sana, can you explain a little more about the top-down and bottom-up, making the difference between well-lived life and a hellish one on page 93? Yeah, let's take a look at that. What was sticking out to you there? What were you wondering about? Yeah. So, yeah. So what he's talking about there in the bottom up and in the top down is this sense that we could not survive unless our attention could be overwhelmed by our environment. For example, if I was so focused on, and actually, unfortunately, we're actually seeing this, right? People who are like, think about texting and driving, right? Or let's just think about an example of somebody who's on their phone and crossing the street and not looking out that the traffic's coming. This would be an example of that we are so locked into something that we're not available to actually be distracted by our environment in an important way, right? Or for example, right, if I'm reading a book or something, and my wife or my kids come into the room, if I was just so locked into a book that I ignored them, like that wouldn't be very good. We want to be able to have some level of distraction because it wakes us up. Because otherwise, we would just be reduced to our own prioritizations, and we would get stuck. So the reason that it's important for us to have that bottom up and top down would be that sense of us being able to focus on things, but then also things being able to distract us. It's important because what we need to learn how to do is kind of flow between those things and flow within them, if that makes sense. Curious, Mansara-sana, what else stuck out to you from the chapter? What else about that, or anything else? Yeah, he says, if outside forces couldn't command at least some of your attention, you'd be unable to step out of the path of an oncoming bus or hear that your baby was in distress. Nor are the benefits confined to emergencies. So our distraction actually allows for us to be seized, have our attention seized by the beauty of a sunset, or our eyes caught by somebody who's across the room. So there's actually an important aspect to our distraction. Our distractibility is part of what makes us human. It's part of what allows us for this spontaneous connection. And I think this is where, especially at least in the Western culture, we have so much emphasis on control. So much of an emphasis on making things what we want them to be. So much of an emphasis on getting the things that we want out of life. And this kind of domineering attitude towards reality is one of isolation. This is one thing that I say to my clients. I can have clients oftentimes who are very intelligent, who can maybe feel like they want to do it their way and they know the right way to do it. And sometimes very intelligent, very competent, very independent. One of the things that I say to them often is, you can build and live in the most beautiful house, but if you want to go through life making everything exactly the way that you want, you are going to live in that house alone. Because relationship means being open to the influence of those in front of us. And that's what we're longing for in relationship. That's what play is. We're longing for this reciprocal influence over each other without dominance and without submission. And here's something that's important. We can find people that are controlling. We can think, well, control dynamics turn into either control or be controlled, control or submit. But submission isn't the opposite of control. It's the reciprocal. The opposite of control is actually separation, freedom. And so often when we live life in this sense of trying to control it, trying to make it exactly what we want, even if we do it, oftentimes we can't accomplish it, and even if we do accomplish it, we're alone. And again, I think this is one of the things that our technology can do, and especially social media, something that I've found. Social media can convince us that every hobby should be turned in to a business. That everything we do should have some financial benefit. That every passion should be turned into a revenue stream. And we are just pillaging reality for output. And this is another theme that winds through this book, that we are approaching life from a perspective of instrumentalism. We're approaching life with the belief and the attitude and the lens that things only matter based on what they produce. And we've lost what's called the constituent framework, a teleological framework, a framework that says some things are important because they're important. Some things are valuable because they're valuable, not because of what they accomplish or what they bring about, but because value is intrinsic in their nature. You, my friend, are one of these things in existence, a person. Your value comes not from what you accomplish, but from the fact that you are. It's not something that you have to earn. Now we come to believe it's something that we have to earn because it's very easy for us when we're children to confuse approval with love. Approval feels like love. And so when we do something, and this is Harry Stack Sullivan's definition of personality, Harry Stack Sullivan said, what we think of as personality is actually all the things that we've been rewarded for that we learn to do. So he said that personality was the collection of all the interpersonal behaviors, responses, and coping mechanisms that we develop to reduce anxiety with our caregivers, bolster self-esteem, and help us to feel like this world is a safer place. And so we learn not to value ourselves, but to evaluate ourselves. And so then this is one of the other things that can lead to this constant drive, this constant go, this constant movement, is that we feel like we have to justify our own existence. And how can you rest if you have to justify your own existence? You can't. And this is this hustle culture. This hustle culture now glorifies exhaustion, glorifies busyness, glorifies work. Like we're lost touch with the fact that, well, work is a means to an end. And so we live in an endless world because we don't have values that orient. Well, the values that we have are instrumental values that say things are only good based on what they bring about, which I think is fundamentally flawed. There are both two different types of goods. Instrumental goods, which bring things about, instrumental goods, which make something good because of what they bring about, and intrinsic goods, constituent goods, things that are good not because of what they bring about, but just because they are. And sometimes those have overlap. But we'll continue with chapter 6 next week. I'll look forward to hearing from you guys then. And then, if you guys have any other questions, you can drop them here. Any questions or reflections, I'd love to hear. Got a couple more minutes, but I would also really love to invite you guys, if you find these topics interesting. I'm running a process group. And a process group is to say it's a place where we can practice being present. And that's why it's called Practicing Presence. And so, Grace, I'll have to check that out. I haven't read that yet, but that sounds very, very similar. I'm curious what the thesis of that is. It sounds, the title, The Burnout Society, sounds like the same idea. But practicing presence is a place to actually step out of the doing and practice being. And what we do in practicing presence, it's a small and intimate group. So it's not a big thing. It's a very, very small and intimate thing where we're in a community of people and everybody there has the same goal: to grow, to gain self-awareness that actually moves the needle, and to develop a better relationship with the present moment. And so if you are somebody who's trying to grow, or you're very involved in growth, and you really just are looking for a place to be supported in that growth, and you want two things. This is one of the things that's unique about practicing presence. If you want an equal measure of compassion and challenge, that's what this group is about. This group is about being honest with ourselves and other people, not rude, not harsh, not critical, but this group is about developing the safety. Flower and fiddle. We'll talk. PP26, we'll set up a consult call. This group is about developing the safety to be honest, the safety to be here. But safety is not a given. This is something I think we're getting wrong with relationships, right? It's actually a very unhelpful thing to say, like, hey, this is a safe space. That's not a helpful thing. Because what it's saying is, don't worry about whether you trust me or not. This is a safe space. Trust that. So it's actually saying you have to trust what I say. Instead of saying like, hey, do you feel safe here? So practicing presence is an interpersonal process group, which means it's a group where we get together and there's not homework, the sessions are naturally organic. So we begin by saying, it's an online group, Chrissy. So we begin by saying like, hey, what's coming up right now? And so rather than talking about presence or thinking about presence or doing techniques or practices, we actually sit together. I say group, but it'll be on a call. And we say, hey, what's coming up for everybody? And then we explore, because we have these relational patterns, and these relational patterns are also the things that make us stuck. And so what happens in a group like this is all of our relational patterns show up and they kind of bump up against each other. And in this group, what we do is then we pause and we step back and we explore it. Because there's all types of communication, all types of things happening in a relationship nonstop. We usually don't talk about any of it. We usually only stick with the content. The content is what's being said. If you want to join the Practicing Presence group, you can comment PP26 or DM me PP26, and we'll hop on a consultation call to see if it's a good fit. So the content is what we're talking about. The process is what's happening in the relationship underneath the surface. Oftentimes we just talk about content, and this is one of the areas, and this is one of the ways where we get so missed. We walk away and say like, oh, they told me that I was doing a really good job, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were disappointed in me. And so in a group like this, what we do is we interact, and then we pause and we step back and we actually ask curiously, like, what's happening here? What's happening below the surface? What's happening in the interpersonal relational process between members? So if you're somebody who's trying to shift from insight into actual experience, if you're trying to live change, that's what this group is about. And if you want to work alongside, if you want connection, if you want to be more present in the relationships that count in your life, if you want to recognize what fears are holding you back from the present moment, you can comment PP26. We'll hop on a consultation call. We'll see if it's a good fit. You and I will talk and we'll see what are the things that are keeping you stuck. What are the things that you're afraid of? What are the common relational stuck points? And then we'll see if this is a good fit for you. That's one of the other things, is that this group isn't for everybody. So this group is for people who are really invested in growth. They care about self-awareness, but they want to move the needle from self-awareness to actual change, not just thinking about it, but making it. So practicing presence is something that if you've been following my work, or if you like my style, or if you like my content, you'll love practicing presence, because it's essentially all the stuff that I talk about, but us doing it in real time, walking alongside of you. Is there a book you're basing this concept off of? Yeah, it would be Irving Yalom's Interpersonal Process and Therapy, or Irving Yalom's The Group and Theory of Theory and Practice of Group Psychotherapy. So Irving Yalom pioneered these groups; he created them. So yeah, you guys can comment PP26 here. You can send me a DM PP26. We'll set up a consultation call. We'll see if it's a good fit. Most importantly, y'all, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for growing. Thank you for caring, because I'm a really deep believer that when we heal ourselves, we really heal the world. And our own work of healing transforms the world for generations beyond what we could ever see. So thank you for being here. And we'll pick up with chapter 6 next week. And chapter 6 is the intimate interrupter, I think. Yeah, and we're moving to part 2, so that's page 113. So thank you so much, PP26, if you're interested, and